Today, a Russian drone attack came closer to hitting a NATO country than any previous Russian attack. The drone attack occurred in the Ukrainian town of Reni, which is just across the Danube River from Romania, which is a member of NATO. The New York Times reports Ukrainian officials and Romania's president blamed the attack on Russia, which has spent the past week bombarding Ukrainian ports near the city of Odessa after pulling out of a deal that enabled Ukraine to ship its grain across the Black Sea. Russia justifies all of its attacks on Ukraine by delivering to the Russian people an uninterrupted stream of propaganda on Russian television. Our next guest spent 5 days virtually locked in a room with that propaganda in constant monitoring of Russian TV for an article in The Atlantic titled, "I watched Russian television for 5 days straight, my full immersion in Putin's propaganda." Gary Shteyngart did not just watch news programs. He watched everything on Russian television, including what we would call reality shows. The reality of Russian life depicted on those shows is grim, with women being threatened and mistreated by drunken husbands and boyfriends. Quote, "A well-trod Russian TV theme, provincials in distress are interviewed by stylish urban hosts as if they are Chekhovian peasants being judged before the district court in Tsarist times. Subconsciously, shows like these teach poorer and older Russians, the kind of people who regularly watch state television, that they should be ashamed before their betters and that they cannot expect much from life or their immediate families." The anti-impotence potion advertised on Russian TV is called The Emperor's Secret, which the ads assure the drunken husbands from the reality shows, quote, "can be mixed with alcohol." After watching 5 days of Russian television, Gary Shteyngart saw Russia's war against Ukraine most accurately represented in Russian television by, actually, the typical drunken, abusive man in the reality shows. Russia is the spurned lover with the very aggressive nature, taking out his inhumanity on the innocent neighbor next door. Despite all the posturing and doublespeak, Russian television announces as much to the world. Whether on the airwaves or perhaps someday at The Hague, the evidence has been clearly presented. Joining us now is New York Times bestselling author Gary Shteyngart. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And this reading about, as I did about Russian television, is much more than I've ever come to understand by our occasional coverage of what they show on so-called news programs and the talk shows there. Our audiences have some familiarity with that. It's the other programming where the propaganda is so fascinatingly embedded. Was that a surprise to you?
Yes, it was actually interesting to see that Russian propaganda exists in almost every single part of state television, not just the news. It's a full stop package. So, for example, you have a show where a doctor is talking about foods that help with your cardiovascular health. And he'll just happen to mention that the best onion to eat is red onion from Crimea, meaning Russian-occupied Crimea, the part of Ukraine that they took over in 2014. So everything has a double meaning, and everything is there to remind the viewer, whether it's reality TV or a health show or even a show where young people are dancing. There's troops of young dancers. Those young dancers are also from a region that Russia has taken over. So you're constantly being reminded of sort of Russia's greatness and the importance of this war.
Did you have any understanding of what it means to be bombarded with this nonstop, and in terms of the credibility of the material? I mean, for you, it was incredible, but you have other sources of information.
Well, I think what's interesting is that a lot of Russians who watch state television day in, day out are older Russians. A lot of the very younger Russians get their news more from the internet, which is one reason why Putin is now thinking of ways to cut off the internet in Russia, or at least to censor it the way it's being censored in countries like China. But older people, and Russia is a very old country. It's demographically, it is not a lot of Russians are having kids, you know. But demographically, a lot of older Russians or even middle-aged Russians live and die by Russian state television. So after my article came out, I would get all these emails from Russians in America. These are people who watch Russian state television in America and who have mothers or mother-in-laws or father-in-laws, and they say, even here in America, they watch this nonstop and have a completely biased view of the world. So this isn't even just happening back in Russia. This is happening among the diaspora of Russians.
So you and your family left Russia when you were about 8 years old. Did you find yourself, when you were immersed in this television, wondering about what your life would be there today if you hadn't left?
Well, I am very certain that if I hadn't left Russia earlier, I would have left, as many young men especially did, and I'm not a young man, but right now they're getting people in their 60s to join the Russian army. They're really desperate for anybody to fight. So I think right now, and having a son, I would be probably fleeing to Turkey or Armenia or Georgia or many of the other places where Russian men especially find themselves, but also anyone who feels that Russia is not going to be successful in the next 10, 20, 30, infinity amount of years.
What does it say about the insecurity of the regime? What does this propaganda ultimately communicate about the insecurity of the regime?
There's, I think, there's both a feeling of superiority matched with a feeling of inferiority in a lot of Russian television. There's a superiority of saying, we are the strongest, we have the best culture, we're far better than Western culture, we're certainly far better than Ukrainian culture, which is why we can commit genocidal acts against them. But at the same time, a feeling of inferiority. There's constant, Anthony Blinken is on all the time, and it's feeling of, why don't they like us? Gosh, all we're trying to do is, invade another country. Why can't they love us the way they should, given how superior we are? So there's this endless cycle of superiority and inferiority that I think really extends to Russia's way of dealing with the world for centuries, not just after Putin or during the Soviet Union. So the feeling...
You report that apparently the most popular Americans on Russian television are Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson.
Well, the case of Donald Trump, and you were talking about him in the previous segment, the many trials that Donald is going to have to face in the next year or two, or who knows how long, that is really one of the biggest things that Russian television, hence the Kremlin, is worried about. Because the feeling is that if Trump comes back, then we have a chance in winning against Ukraine. Because he may hold back on armaments. He may, there's, as the leader of the free world and certainly as one of the chiefs of NATO, he is the person that can really help Ukraine win the war. And without him, we really have a chance. And Tucker, and I haven't seen Russian television since Tucker's demise from Fox, but you would see Tucker all the time. I was surprised they didn't just give him the whole hour, translated into Russian. That would have been easier because you would just get snippets of him throughout the day on each of the three main Russian channels. He was their best friend.
Gary Shteyngart, thank you very much for doing what we couldn't do. Thank you very much.